Good evening and welcome back. I'm Matthew Torres hosting Open Line tonight, and with me is Dr. Anna Settle. We are talking about a topic that parents, unfortunately nowadays, need to learn more about, and that is talking to your children about school shootings. What was interesting, the last caller said, was that she does not want this to be the new norm. Do you feel it is the new norm?
I don't know that it's necessarily the new norm, but it's becoming much more normal, especially in the eyes of our teens, because they're seeing it happen so frequently and hearing about it so frequently. And in fact, like we were saying earlier, you know, it's not even news for more than a day or two because it happens so frequently.
And with the age of social media, it's
Yes.
like they find out about it, who knows, even before their parents. Now we do have a caller with us today. Paul, good evening. What's your question?
Yes, good evening, folks. My question for Dr. Settle is, first of all, how do you report a bullying incident? And secondly, how do you feel about arming teachers or supervisory personnel, or, you know, I'll just hang up and listen to your response, and we thank you.
Paul, thank you. It seems like, I know you're a psychologist, so
Right.
all of this is really out of your realm, but do you have a response to those questions?
So about arming teachers and school personnel, that's sort of out of my purview. I do think that we need to be much more careful about how guns are getting into the schools. We now have school resource officers in many schools who are there. In fact, I believe there was one in the Kentucky shooting. I'm not positive, but
Yes,
I believe
there
there
was
was one there. So yeah, I mean, it's a conversation to be had that needs to include people from all disciplines. As a psychologist, I don't necessarily know that I can be an expert on that.
And then he mentioned reporting bullying. Can you report bullying?
Can I?
Yeah, as a psychologist.
Yes, absolutely. And each school might have a different protocol, and it seems like schools are talking to teachers and students about what that protocol looks like. And I'm pretty sure any elementary school student can probably tell you the checklist of things that they need to look for and need to do. We're having that conversation. But you know, if that conversation is not happening, I would say the first thing you need to do is to tell the teacher, the coach, whomever it is, and just make sure that that it becomes known. Because I think sometimes either we normalize it and so we don't report it, or we assume that it's going to stop and so we don't say anything, and that's when it exacerbates and people really do start to become more at risk.
When they're not being heard.
Right.
It's about that listening. It's just that the simple listening aspect can really just make a huge difference before or after a crazy incident like a shooting.
That's right, yeah. And I've heard parents who have come in and I hear a range of different stories. So somebody might come in and say, yes, I reported this and the school was so responsive and receptive, and they put all of these things in place to make it better. And then I've heard parents come in and say, you know, I called and reported this, it was minimized, I went up the ladder and reported it even to the superintendent, and I really didn't feel like I got much reaction.
Yeah. Hey Charlotte, good evening. Charlotte, what's your question? Hey Charlotte, what's your question?
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my call. I do have a comment. After this last shooting in Kentucky, I did call my son's school. He is in a school in Montgomery County. And I offered, you know, my services, and I talked with a few of the parents that were willing to offer their services. And because we can kind of be, you know, their eyes and their ears as well, you know, at the school. But I kind of felt like I kind of got the cold shoulders, like, well, you don't know anything about this, and you would know how to, you know, handle this. And but I do feel like that a lot of times, because the school psychologists are not always in the school. You know, they have lots of other schools that they're, you know, having to go to and to deal with. So what can be done, being that the school psychologists are not there at the school every day? I mean, who else can kind of pick up the banner, you know, in their stead to, you know, speak with the students about, you know, just whatever they feel like they need to know concerning, you know, bullying or, you know, encouragement and, you know, so forth.
Thank you for that.
That's a great question. I mean, anytime a parent is willing to be part of the conversation, it's upsetting to me to hear that they were turned away. There are counseling committees that can be implemented in the absence of a counselor. So a counselor can do the actual work and do the training, but there can be parents and administrators that come together, and maybe they have like a counseling committee who is there and can sort of facilitate treatment to outside sources, or who can be trained to have some conversations with students that aren't necessarily clinical.
And that would be up to the school?
Yes.
And she also mentioned as far as just even the emotional support of being there. Are kids willing to talk to a group of parents?
Yes, I mean, especially younger children.
Okay.
They will talk to anyone, so they're willing to talk to anybody. Now, adolescents, you get into the teenage years, they're a little bit harder to get to open up. But yes, I mean, even the presence of parents around, just listening and knowing dynamics and sort of watching for interactions among friends, that's really important too. We don't have to necessarily be sitting down face to face having a one-on-one conversation about bullying. We can just be aware of what's going on in the school and identify things that are happening.
How has social media played a huge difference in how you help kids and just how they get through the day-to-day process?
So, children are growing up much more quickly now that they have access to social media. We can't keep track. In fact, I'm learning about new social media sites every day. In fact, there are social media sites that you can go on and you can make a comment on someone's page and be completely anonymous, and that's dangerous, because people go in and they just make comments, and there is no consequence if they say something negative about someone else. But it certainly plays a role. I mean, what is put on social media is not real life. People put these perfected pictures on there. They say things that they wouldn't say to someone face to face, and so we get a lot of teenagers who are coming in with low self-esteem, self-confidence issues, symptoms of depression, and then on top of that, somebody makes a negative comment about that, and then that just exacerbates what's already there. It's definitely a problem.
Is it harder to treat students more because of social media?
Yes, because the triggers for what are causing the problems with them, they continue. They're happening every day. They're happening all day, every day. They're happening on social media when they get home from school. They're happening first thing when they wake up in the morning. I mean, there are no boundaries around it. And
unfortunately, our phones, I admit it, is always attached to my hand. And I'm sure there's plenty of bullying, even on social media, anywhere online. We were talking about earlier today, I asked you if you've ever gone to any of the shootings or anything of a big incident, and you said you have. You're part of it. It's part of a team?
So there's critical incident stress debriefing teams, and I've been part of that team, but not for a school shooting. But do you want me to talk a little bit about what that looks like?
It's interesting. And how many are part of this team, and what do you guys do when you get on the ground?
Yeah, so it just depends on the number of people who have been affected, and also resources. So if you're in a smaller, more rural area, you're not necessarily going to have as many people who are available to come in. But they will bring in a team of licensed clinicians usually, and they will set up just areas where students can come in and essentially go to either a private counseling session. They will do group counseling sessions. They'll have conversations with the entire student body just to sort of process through what has happened.
Is that the same whenever we hear either another student lost a life, or when they have counselors on board the following day at these schools? Would that be a part of the team?
Would that be a part of the...
Would the team be a part of that?
The counseling team that I was talking about?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. So they wouldn't necessarily be doing any sort of clinical work, but yeah, if they're already in place, they are already trained to help identify or just navigate or get people from where they are to a clinician that might be able to help them, that sort of specializes in whatever they're needing. That can certainly be someone or a team of people who facilitate that.
I'm really curious to know, let's go back to the shooting. If you go to, if they ask you to speak with this particular student, what are the first few questions you ask?
So someone who has seen this happen, or who was at the school when it happened, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question I would ask is simply, how are you? What do you want to talk about? Are you okay? And just let them sort of open the dialogue, because what's happening with them is they are traumatized. So we don't need to have a rational conversation about, what happened and what I'm going to do to keep them safe at this point. I just need to hear what you have to say, and I need to comfort you in the moment and just listen. As they move through that process, as a little bit of time passes, then you can start to ask questions more about the experience that they're having, looking for symptoms, talking about things that they can do to minimize those symptoms. If they're having nightmares, what can we do to treat that? So the initial conversation really just needs to be about listening and comforting.
Which is a huge deal, and I know you wrote an op-ed piece as well, is just making sure they're okay, listening and then just comforting them. It's always easier said than done.
Right.
I feel like
Yes.
whenever you see someone in such a traumatic event, I mean, in our job, we speak to people all the time after tragedies, which it's always not easy, but it seems like that simple question, a very broad question, how are you, just opens up a lot of
What do you
things.
need? Yeah, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to say it's going to be okay, and it's really not going to be okay. If they've lost a friend or a sibling or a parent who's lost a child, it's really not going to be okay for them. And so to just say, I'm here, what do you need from me?
What are some of the, I know, post after the trauma itself, are there things then, all right, what do we need to look out for? Are they okay? What are kind of the things that after maybe several weeks after the incident that parents should be looking out for?
So there's a normal sort of bereavement period, and then beyond that, if we're seeing that students for months on end are afraid to go to school, or the nightmares persist, or they actually are re-experiencing the shooting. So, you know, a lot of students will talk about every morning they wake up, they hear those shots again. That's a normal traumatic reaction to a trauma. If they are sitting in class and they hit the floor because they feel like they're going to be shot, that's an abnormal reaction. Yeah, and so younger children, I mean, they may regress. There may be some bedwetting, some thumb sucking, and we're talking about younger, like kindergarten and younger. So there are definitely different signs to look for when we're talking about potential PTSD.
And if that's the case, obviously seek help.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Again, if you guys have any questions, 615-737+. We have about 15 minutes, so make sure to call us if you do have any questions. We'll be back more after the break.